agus Nollaig na man hana díobh go léir. Good evening, welcome and a very happy Women's Christmas to you all. My name is Mary Shugru and I'm grateful to all of you who have joined us this evening, to our friends and supporters who are usually with us in person in Boston and Washington DC, and to our wonderful supporters across the United States and in Ireland. We so miss you. Our hearts are with you all and we look forward to the day when we can gather with you again. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for your dedicated support of the partnership in what has been a truly challenging year. But this evening we celebrate the cherished tradition of Nollaig na mBan Women's Christmas. Nollaig na mBan is an old Irish custom. Tradition had it that on this day each year, after the hard work of the Christmas festivities, the men would give women a break from the housework on January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. It was mainly a rural tradition, most popular in Cork and Kerry, a day in which women would go out with their friends, their sisters, their aunts and mothers. And as a native of Carsaveen, County Kerry, I have distinct memories of the tradition. I remember my mother having women around to the house for tea and sandwiches, and the best Christmas cake was saved and served on that day. I also recall my grandmother heading to town for a few sherries and a few laughs. I don't know about you, but after this past year, I too could certainly use a few sherries and a slice of the best Christmas cake. Although the roles and duties of men and women may have changed from the original Nollaig na mBan tradition, a celebration of women's hard work and sacrifice is as important as ever. Life can be challenging and it can be easy to forget, to pause, to reflect and applaud the incredible work women do each day for their families, communities, countries and the world. We've been celebrating Nollaig na mBan for the past 9 years, and this evening we take some time to celebrate and hear from 4 of Ireland's own. Our 2021 honorees exemplify women who positively transform their societies and make enduring contributions to our world. We have a wonderful programme lined up for you, and first it's my pleasure to introduce a dear friend of the Irish-American Partnership, Ireland's Ambassador to the United States, Dan Mulhall.
Nollaig na mBan is a great Irish tradition and one which is taking on more and more prominence these days, and rightly so. I've had the pleasure of attending Nollaig na mBan events organised by the Irish-American Partnership here in Washington DC over the last few years. It's always a very enjoyable occasion, one of the first events of every new year. This year, unfortunately, it will have to be a virtual event, but nonetheless, I feel pleasure and privilege to be able to pay tribute to 4 outstanding Irish women who've shown in their careers great leadership and given inspiration to others. I speak of our former president, Mary Robinson, of Samantha Barry, the editor-in-chief of GLAMOUR magazine, of my colleague and friend, BYRNE, NASON, Ireland's ambassador to the United Nations, who will be taking on the role now of representing Ireland on the Security Council, a huge challenge and a huge honour for Ireland to be in that position. And last but not least, Katrina Perry, an outstanding Irish journalist who I knew when she was here as correspondent in Washington and is now fronting the 601 News. So tremendous examples, all of them, of the qualities and the leadership abilities of Irish women. I want to also pay a warm tribute to Mary Sugru and her team at the Irish-American Partnership. Ireland is connected with the United States in so many ways, but one of the connections that I appreciate is the fact that organisations like the Irish-American Partnership provide Irish Americans with an opportunity to provide support to various projects and causes in Ireland, and I really do value the work that's done by the Irish-American Partnership. I'm a strong supporter of what they do. I like the way they approach the work they do. I like the impact they make. I like the fact that they give people here in the United States, Irish Americans, an opportunity to connect with maybe the areas where their people came from before they left Ireland for the United States. So I see a rich future for Irish-American relations, and I know that the Irish-American Partnership will be an important part of the matrix of connections that link our 2 countries, links of people-to-people connections forged by generations of immigrants who came to America from Ireland and helped to make this country what it is today, economic links in more recent times, and now two-way links of trade and investment across the Atlantic in both directions, and also more and more educational and scientific cooperation. But the bedrock of our connection with the United States remains the tremendous community we have here of Irish Americans who feel an affinity and affection for Ireland, and who have an opportunity through the Irish American Partnership to make a contribution to very good causes and very good projects organised or supported by the Partnership in Ireland. So thank you to all of the supporters of the Irish American Partnership for all you do to make the work of the Partnership possible and to enable it to achieve the goals it achieves so richly in its activities in Ireland. Tásúla gom go mbeidh lá maith I gach aine agus banachtaí na féile díobh go léir.
Thank you, Ambassador Mulhall. We appreciate your wonderful endorsement of our work. Also joining us this evening from Washington, D.C. is Director of the Northern Ireland Bureau, Andrew Elliott. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello. It's a real pleasure to join the Irish American Partnership and indeed you all today for this important event, which this year, of course, is online. We can't be together in person. Nollaig mBan, of course, marks particularly the role of women. And I'm really pleased to come and speak to you at a time whenever at the most senior levels in the Northern Ireland administration, we have both the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, both are women, the most senior political appointments in the land, and indeed the head of the civil service this year is also now a woman for the first time, and we have several women ministers throughout the executive. So we're playing an important role in ensuring that fairness and equality reaches right to the top of the system in Northern Ireland. In terms of the Irish American Partnership, of course, their mission is to empower the next generation, to invest in people, culture and ideas, and that includes linking the diaspora to the island of Ireland, north and south. And this is a wonderful time to be doing that with all the positive developments that are happening. I'd like to congratulate the honorees today, Samantha Barry, who is Editor-in-Chief of GLAMOUR magazine, the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, Ambassador Geraldine BYRNE NASON from the United Nations, and RTE's Katrina Perry. All women who, in their very different ways, have helped in that inspiration and setting an example to future generations about what is possible and what can be achieved if people put their minds to it. I don't want to take too much of your time today, but I wish you all very well for the rest of the event. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andrew. We are proud to support schools, communities and integrated education in Northern Ireland for the past 30 years. The Irish American Partnership connects Irish America directly with education and community programmes across the island of Ireland, honouring our Irish heritage by investing in Ireland's youth. Thanks to you, we have disbursed over 35 million to Irish children and communities since our founding. The Partnership is proud to serve as your bridge back to Ireland, linking you to the people and places you hold dear and that have had an impact in your life or in the lives of your ancestors. We reaffirm and restore connections to Ireland, whether you're native-born, first or fifth generation. We do this by building relationships with Irish schools and communities, equipping students, teachers and community leaders with the resources they need to educate and inspire. From grants to primary schools, to investments in science education, to scholarships for university access, to supporting cross-community education initiatives in Northern Ireland. Together, we invest in the people and ideas that are building a peaceful and prosperous Ireland, one that preserves the Irish way of life we cherish, while also creating a more inclusive and equitable society for all. Without you, this work would not be possible. We thank you for your continued support, and we thank you especially for your generous support of this evening's event. We offer a particularly hearty thank you to our wonderful sponsors and our host committee, led by Chair Monique Chouanier. Míle buíochas díobh go léir. Now I'd like to share some very special messages with you from former Nollaig honorees, from the recipients of your generous support, and from our chairman in Chicago, Mike Clune.
Hello everybody, it's a real pleasure to be with you tonight on this special occasion, and I'm delighted that the Irish American Partnership asked me to send a little praise over to the 4 honorees tonight. 4 women who have made real impact in their different versions of work in the different fields that they work in. And I'm sure, like me, I received it in 2019. They're humbled that people recognise their work, but also delighted. It is always a great thrill for other people to recognise what you're doing. And so I wish you all well. Enjoy your honour and enjoy the time that goes with it. I would also like to thank the Irish American Partnership, their staff, their board and their donors for the years of support they have given integrated education in Northern Ireland. It really is outstanding. And when I often think about sometimes people who give money like your donors, do they often wonder the change it makes? I can tell you, over the years, the Irish American Partnership's money has made a huge change to thousands of children's lives in our schools. They've allowed us to open schools where children learn to celebrate each other's culture, not fear it. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
I'm a really big fan of the Irish American Partnership. I've seen close up the work that they do in Irish schools, north and south. It's terrific work with our young people, helping them to think differently, to experience more, to aim higher. It's truly transformative, life-changing work. And this evening I am absolutely delighted to be part of the celebration of these 4 wonderful honorees. 4 women of accomplishment and distinction, all proven leaders, all terrific role models. I'm so looking forward to the conversations they're going to have shortly, and I know we're all going to learn a great deal from them.
Good evening, one and all. I am totally humbled and privileged to pay tribute here tonight to Sam, my dearest past pupil and forever friend of Scoilbarra here in Ballincollig, Cork. Sam, you are a true inspiration to all young Irish people. You have taught them that with self-belief, dogged determination and a most joyful, charismatic demeanour, anything is possible. Mary, we are also grateful to the Irish American Partnership and all the amazing support that you give for educational opportunities in Ireland. Thanks to your donation and vision, we now have more books in our library, more materials for science, maths, music, PE, and more resources for our pupils with special education needs, just to mention a few. You are ensuring that we in Ireland will continue to produce great Irish leaders such as Sam and Geraldine and Caitríona and Mary, who shine their light in Ireland and throughout the whole world. Gur míle maith agam go léir agus tá míad anbhródúil asaf maná léachas na hÉireann.
Flin féh agad. Miara Clune is Anam Dom. Happy New Year to you all. My name is Michael Clune. I'm the chairman of the Irish American Partnership. I am honoured to say that I've been associated with this wonderful organisation for over 20 years and worked with Mary and our team. I've seen firsthand some of the benefits of the programmes that we've been able to support education at home in Ireland. Let me start by thanking our distinguished panellists, Mary, Samantha, Geraldine and Caitríona. We are greatly appreciative and very fortunate to have you here today. And I look forward to listening to the programme. I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. I'm happy to say that I can announce a new initiative starting this year with the Peter McVerry Trust. Peter McVerry Trust is one of the most respected organisations in Ireland supporting the homeless. They have done wonderful work over the years. And we firmly believe that our core mission of supporting education correlates very directly with their mission. So Mary will elaborate a little bit more about this programme. This is made possible by financial support from the partnership, but also from my secondary school friend, Dermot Desmond. And we are very appreciative of Dermot's support and participation. So having said that, I'll hand it over to the panelists and the programme. I look forward to listening. and I'd like to wish you all a happy, prosperous and safe New Year. God bless everybody.
Thank you, Anne, May, Karen. We are delighted to have you with us this evening, and we are pleased to support your important work. And as our chairman Mike Clune just mentioned, the partnership is privileged to announce this evening a grant to the Peter McVerry Trust, one of Ireland's leading charities for the homeless, which will develop a comprehensive educational programme aimed at the prevention and alleviation of homelessness in Ireland. This grant was driven by Mike and his friend Dermot Desmond. We are grateful to facilitate this transformative $1 million investment in support of the McVerry Trust. And now it is my pleasure to be joined by my colleague, Clodagh Boyle.
Thank you, Mary. I'm delighted to join all of you tonight for one of our favourite events of the year, celebrating these incredible women while supporting children, schools and communities in Ireland. And if you would like to support the work of the partnership this evening, we hope you'll join us by texting Ireland to 243-725 and making a gift of any amount, big or small, and we truly thank you. Now we have come to the highlight of our programme this evening, two of our Nollaig honorees, Permanent Representative of Ireland to the UN, Ambassador Geraldine Byrne and RTE news anchor and author Katrina Perry. Ambassador Byrne took Ireland's seat on the UN Security Council earlier this week, the first Irish female diplomat to do so. She has chaired sessions on the UN Commission for the Status of Women and also served in the Department of the Taoiseach, making her the highest-ranking female civil servant in Ireland. And as Katrina is the former Washington bureau chief and US political correspondent for RTE, this is sure to be a lively conversation.
So Ambassador Geraldine Byrne, Ireland's ambassador to the UN, you joined the civil service, the Department of Foreign Affairs, more or less straight out of college, and there were very few women in the department at that time. And you've been a trailblazer there, I think it's fair to say. So you might tell us a little bit about that path. I'm sure it was quite challenging at times.
Thanks, Katrina. Well, I have to say, when you use the word challenging, it doesn't come to mind, because when I joined the department in 1981, it was just 8 years since the marriage bar was lifted. So it's true that when I joined the department, there weren't that many senior women in the department. There was one female ambassador, I think, at the time. But also, I guess I'm a small town girl. I came from Drogheda. I went to a small university, Maynooth. So I was always ready to have to sort of put my head down and be very determined in anything I did. So I came in, full of vim and vigor in a way, from a generation in the 80s in Ireland where it was actually rather difficult for young graduates to find roles in Ireland. A lot of my peers left indeed to come to New York. I met them later as I became a young diplomat here in New York. So when I joined the department, there was a real sense that we were the generation that had the opportunity now. Those brilliant women who had been forced to resign until 1983 if they married were gone. We were a small enough group, and we were starting off with great optimism. Then I must admit that over the period of my career, I think I would say that I faced the same challenges as a lot of professional women face. And maybe we can talk later about this, primarily related to, if you like, the whole of your life and your career being managed somehow over time. But maybe this goes back to my education by presentation, Sisters in Drogheda, never felt that there was a limit to what I was going to have an opportunity to do. And the department, I must say, for the period that I was lucky to be in the early days, never gave me a sense that I couldn't put my hand up for any job. So the challenges were in managing over time, but certainly not in any structural impediments in the early days. And I suppose I came in also, if you can think about 1979, I went to university in that period. We had the first woman cabinet minister, Maura Geoghegan-Quinn, the first woman since Markovich. So there was a sense women were arriving at the public level. Mary Robinson was a public figure, very active. So I was aware that there was a degree of sort of the public role of women was beginning to sort of emerge. So in my innocence, maybe, I joined the department hoping that I would contribute in some way to that.
And was it important for you? You mentioned several women there. Was it important to have those kind of female role models or women that you could look up to, whether they were within the department or not?
It was, frankly, because it's a bit of a cliche, but I believe in it. If you can't see it, you can't be it. It's very hard as a young girl. I was 22, straight out of college, to imagine yourself, say, in a role of being an ambassador or being a senior public policy person at all. Mary Tinney, who was the only ambassador at the time, I just realized recently that when she retired in the mid-80s, she was one of only 2 women across the whole Irish public service at that rank, an assistant secretary or ambassadorial rank. There were 94 jobs in Ireland at the time that were open at that level, and she was one of 2. So, it was important to know that there were women who had gone before. I must say, within the department, the huge support I had was predominantly at roughly peer level. A lot of, people who were 2 or 3 years ahead of you in the system, telling you what to expect and where the elephant traps might be. We had very few women at the senior levels. 1 or 2 women who went on to great careers, like Anne Anderson, Mary Whelan, Mary Cross, who all had to battle a little bit. And of course, I wasn't aware of that as a 22-year-old. It's only in retrospect I recognized that their challenges made it easier then for me coming a decade or more later. But the peer support within the department from both male and female was very important. But I will say some of my biggest mentors were of the non-female persuasion, and I'll always be grateful for that as well.
And that is important. I mean, we are celebrating women today, but it is important to have someone looking out for you at any level, no matter who they are.
Absolutely. I mean, people who actually, they would argue recognize talent, but I would argue we're willing to listen, because I think one of the things that we do, women to women, is to talk more easily to each other and share. And, when you identify somebody, particularly a man in a senior role, when you're that young, who might actually understand what you're saying, that makes a huge difference. And so there were a few men who were senior officers who were extremely able, whom I watched. And one over much later in my career, whom I still remember so many lessons from, is the great Maurice Hayes, who became, of course, Senator Maurice Hayes, but who had a huge career himself in the Northern Ireland public service, and who was one of the best gender champions I ever met. And so Maurice, when I worked with him in the Forum on Europe, that was already almost 15 or 20 years into my career, taught me a lot. So I took a lot from all round as mentors over time.
Now, you touched on it there a little, but for any professional woman, there are challenges outside the workplace around a partner, a family, and of course that's much harder when you throw in that relocation element that comes up for diplomats every few years. So you might talk to us a little bit about how you navigated that over the years.
Well, I guess you used the word challenge at the beginning. That's probably a good example of a challenge, and I didn't make it that easy in that I chose to marry another diplomat. So it was double trouble in a way. Brian Nason, who is also my husband and was of the diplomatic family, he and I, for the first 5 or 6 years of our marriage, commuted at weekends. We were both posted in different countries, had different roles. So that was a bit of a challenge in itself. We made it work, but there were big compromises personally, socially involved in that for sure. I will say then when our son was born in 2000, that was a point where we actually had a hard, crunchy decision to make about not moving separately again. In the middle of all of that, before our son was born, I took time out of the Department of Foreign Affairs and looked for a role in an international organization. At the time, Brian was posted in Paris. I applied as a private citizen, almost a diplomat taking leave, to the OECD, where I then spent a wonderful 8 years. So I think it was hugely valuable for my career, but frankly, the driver in that was so that I would actually get to live with the man I'd married for a while, since we had been commuting. The choice then around our child was a more hard stop choice that we made, which was that we wouldn't take postings separately. So we waited in Dublin for a number of years until the remarkable moment arose where Brian was ambassador to Belgium and I was appointed then as an ambassador to the European Union, so that we were actually living in the same city and our child could go to a school and see his parents at night time in the same house.
What a novelty.
Touche.
I'm sure at times over the years, and you mentioned there stepping out to concentrate on your son when he was just born, I'm sure at times they were very difficult decisions and people around you possibly said, gosh, are you mad doing that? Your career will never recover and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, certainly the first time I stepped out, which was in '92, to take the role at the OECD, the death knell, the death bells were being rung. I was told, you know, you'll never come back in the same way. I was out actually for 8 years. I'll admit now that when I say to people, you know, in my current role, I actually spent 8 years in the OECD, nobody remembers I was gone that long. So for me, that's always been a message. I was absent from a block of time from the mothership, as it were. But of course, when I came back into a really responsible role, and from then on gave my all back to my own department. And when Alex was born, he was a very premature baby. He was actually, you've just had a baby, Caitriona, you know, he was 3 months premature. So he was born at 29 weeks. For me, there was just no question. That was the only priority I had in my life, was to make sure that Alex was okay. Now, a fully fledged NYU student of politics, not a bother. But that was a critical time in my life. And my career just didn't even feature as a question for me. So I made the priorities as I saw them. I think, you know, maybe I'm generalizing here, but I don't know that women are always as career centric as men in the way they view choices. So taking a risk when you're looking across the broader interest of your life, not just your career, I think sometimes those what appear like risks from the outside actually make eminent sense inside. And I'm a believer that you then can leverage that time, as I did in my career afterwards, to your advantage.
So you kind of treated your career in stepping stones or blocks or modules sort of concept.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, it's something that I say a lot now that I'm at this great age to younger women, that you know, any young woman beginning a career now at 22, as I was, you're looking at least at 50 years of a time span for a career. In my case, you know, as I said to you, 8 years, and people sort of knew I was doing another job, but it didn't register that I was absent. My time with Alex, which was a year and a half after he was born, so practically 2 years away from the department again, you know, you come back in ready for action. You come back in looking for the kind of jobs you know you're capable of, rather than sort of putting gently your hand up to say, if I'm allowed back in, may I please? You know, I went back in each case, having been out of the department, to serious roles, a lot of heavy lifting. So I'm not pretending there wasn't, you know, a real adjustment, particularly after Alex was born. But, you know, the fact is that we don't change if we take time out. You know, we're still the same qualified, able, determined women we were before we took on the previous role. So I think building on your last contribution, choosing over time what suits you, and certainly for young women now, you know, there are periods that may not suit them to be in the most frontline role, but you know, in the next 5 or 6 years it may well. So I certainly don't see that in any way as fatal to a career. I wouldn't say there are people who try to do this, mainly men, who plot their career over the 50 years and can tell you where they'll be on a role or a posting. I never did that. There is a certain element of, you know, waiting to see what opportunities arise, of course, but being ready and having a reputation, I think, that shows that you will be able to step up is really important.
Now, you mentioned there roles that had a lot of heavy lifting and were tough roles. I'd imagine none more so than the one you have now as Ireland's ambassador to the UN. And of course, women in the minority there amongst the ambassadors from around the world who've been appointed to the UN. So, is there a collegiate spirit amongst women? I mean, we see in the US Congress that there's a women's caucus, regardless of party. Is there that same sort of spirit among the female ambassadors at the UN?
Absolutely. I have to say, in my entire career, this is the most collegial environment I've ever been in. When it comes, in general, I have to say men and women, but in particular for women, there's 193 countries in the UN, 193 ambassadors. Now, just under 50 are women. So we do have a sort of girls club, as it were. We have our own WhatsApp group, frequently exchanging on policy issues. And I will say that was a really important network for me in our Security Council campaign. But more importantly, on a Saturday morning, someone may see or hear something that's better shared amongst girlfriends, and we do that. We've had several girls' nights only. I had the one I remember best was an evening here last February on Valentine's night. We did a red, we're both wearing by accident red today, tonight, Katrina, but we had a red evening here at the Irish residence where all the women at the UN arrived, manless, as it were, on Valentine's evening. I think we did it on the 13th, to be frank. But anyway, we all arrived dressed in red and had a great evening with literature and music, just a night out together. And still to this day, people say, are you going to do another red evening next year? So, you know, we have fun together. But look, you know, I'm going on to a Security Council where some of the toughest issues in the international environment, in other words, life and death issues, war and peace are being discussed. 15 at that table. A very good prospect now that we will have 5 women at the table, which is nearly the most ever. At some point in the past, there were 6 women, but we will again have 5 women sitting at that table, including the US ambassador, the British ambassador, myself, the Norwegian ambassador. So we will have a very strong, and we have the ambassador of the smallest country ever elected, Vincent and the Grenadines, just had a presidency of the council. So women are playing an increasingly important role in the UN, and there is a great spirit. There is a great spirit amongst us.
And you mentioned, of course, the Security Council, which is absolutely a huge role for Ireland. Now, how difficult was it to actually navigate, negotiate, persuade, whatever had to be done to get that campaign? It was so successful that saw Ireland win the seat.
Yeah, I'll admit, you know, this is my dream job, but the campaign was a really, really big stretch. Ireland, Canada, Norway, the 3 countries running, with, you know, the bar is very high. You have to have a 2/3 majority. So it was a hugely intensive campaign, and the end of the campaign clearly run in COVID times. So many conversations on the screen. I think we had a very strong advantage in the race, in that we have a very distinctive profile here at the UN and on the global stage. You know, an independent, small country, and small has its advantages here at the UN, in the sense that we're not a country that brings a big, heavy geostrategic agenda to the table. If you think of how divided the big powers are at the moment, bringing a country that's not geostrategically implicated, that's not entangled, for example, already on the ground in Syria, where our only interest in somewhere like Syria is to end human suffering. It's a humanitarian interest. We're also not a member of a military alliance, but we have a huge reputation here on the ground for our development policy, our disarmament policy, our defense of human rights. And there's an authenticity. President Higgins said that a lot, and Mary Robinson, who was very active also here, they both stood up to say, with Ireland, you know, authenticity matters. We are what we appear to be. Simon Coveney, who, you know, was the face of the campaign in many ways here, he said to people, what you see is what you get. And I think that that message won through, that people know we're valued, we're principled, and we will stand up when we go to that table. We don't sort of wax and wane. So it was called the Group of Death, but I think we stood out for that reason. And I would also say not just our political values and principles, but I think our national identity, or even I would extend it to say our cultural identity, was a big boost to how people were inclined to look at us on the stage. Because after all, you're electing the entire country. It's not just your policy in the Middle East or your policy in Africa, or as we had a very forward-leaning policy in relation to the small islands. So, you know, we had a range of policies that were critical, our traditional values that were very important, but then what did we look and feel like here? And I think that our cultural offer, our literature, our music, importantly, how we engaged with the members on the ground. So it was a kind of a holistic campaign, and I'm just glad that it ended well. And now we're in full throttle here, getting ready to step up at midnight on the 31st of December. So only a few sleeps away.
Now, you have 2 years, you have to make it count, as you were saying there. What would be the hopes or the ambitions that Ireland has on the Security Council?
Well, look, you know, I've always said going on to the council, we're not going on to make up the numbers. We do genuinely want to make a difference. And those characteristics I described earlier, that independence, the partnership we can play and the alliances we can build, and our empathy with countries. You know, 60% of the agenda on the Security Council is fragile situations in Africa. The Middle East is obviously the next region that gets a lot of attention. You know, we want to move on to a council where the current tensions that we see, particularly between the permanent five, that there's an opening in there for us where we can step up. You know, I mentioned Syria and Yemen, two countries that are, you know, protracted, horrific conflict situations on the ground. Yemen, a country now driven by hunger, you know, something that Ireland, surely we can make a difference on something like that. Let's see what change this new US administration makes. That remains to be seen. There are certain big dossiers like climate and security, Iran, where there may be changes in US policy that will allow a country like ours that can speak to all sides. I've always said we go on. I mentioned earlier, we don't have geostrategic interests. We go up to that table, we can speak to China, Russia, Iran, to any country as Ireland. So there are no holds barred when it comes to our capacity to be helpful, to forge compromises, to forge outcomes. We want to see results, and we will play as a constructive goodwill player, I think, at the table. And certainly I'm hoping that our strong track record here will be seen as giving us the, if you like, the leverage to do that at the table.
And we'll have a strong Irish woman doing most of the talking there as well. Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason, thank you for the conversation, and I'm sure I speak for both of us when I say that we're very honoured to be part of the Nollaig na celebration.
A real privilege and an honour. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you. And congratulations to Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason and Katrina Perry. Now we have quite a treat for you, a virtual rendition of Amazing Grace, care of Fiona Crosby and the City of Derry International Choir Festival. This piece is performed by singers from 9 post-primary schools in Derry, Strabane, Omagh and Donegal. These talented young singers present this to you as a message of hope at the beginning of a much brighter new year. Enjoy.
Like me.
How wonderful. Now I'm delighted to introduce our next honorees who truly embody global women's leadership. Join me in welcoming the 7th President of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson. President Robinson is in conversation with our own dear friend and supporter, Editor-in-Chief of GLAMOUR, Samantha Barry.
President Robinson, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's an absolute honor to get to talk to you on this very special day for this event. I want to start and go back a little bit, first of all. I grew up with you as the president in Ireland. You were the first woman to hold that office. How did you work on, the bridge between honoring the tradition of the office, but also forging your own path as the first female president of Ireland?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Sam, but maybe I'll start by saying how pleased I am to take part in the 10th annual event of Nollaig na mBan, which I'm delighted we celebrate so much now in Ireland. And the Irish-American Partnership do such good work on education in particular and so many other things. So I'm very pleased. I was with the Irish-American Partnership physically, as some will remember, I'm sure, in 2016, but we have to do it virtually this year. And to come to your question, I didn't seek to become President of Ireland. I was very surprised when the Irish Labour Party said they wanted a good candidate. Would I consider being a candidate? And I accepted in the end, after some thought, on the basis that I would run as an independent, and maybe we would get the other parties of the left to join, and then we would have a broad, sort of rainbow group that would try to not win, because the bookies told me I was 100-to-1 outsider. So it wasn't a case of winning, it was a case of making the case for a more active and proactive presidency at the local level, at the national level, and at the international level. And then when I was elected, which was a wonderful honor and an incredible trust of the Irish people and incredibly hard work by so many who worked for that, I was determined to do it proudly as a woman. I wasn't trying to do it like a man at all, because I felt that the strengths that I had as a woman were actually going to make me, hopefully, be able to do a better job.
And it's 30 years on, and there was a nice synergy in terms of the day that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were president-elect and vice president-elect was on the 30th anniversary of when you were actually elected. How significant do you think it is having the first female VP in the US taking office this year?
Well, obviously, I was delighted at the Biden-Harris election and that administration. And it was a nice coincidence, because we also have a coincidence that Joe Biden also has a link with my hometown of Ballina. And he talked about it when he came to Ireland a few years ago and received an honorary degree from Dublin University as vice president. And I was chancellor conferring the degree. And I've met him over the years many times. And we're friendly. I don't know him exceptionally well, but we're friendly. And I'm delighted with the election of Kamala Harris as the vice president. I was very, very impressed with her acceptance speech, because I could see that she understands completely her role, not just in the United States, but for women and girls globally. And she knows how to take that role. She said, "I'm the first, but I won't be the last." And she honored the women who, her mother and other women who had stood for her and impressed and inspired her. And we are always on the shoulders of other women when we take any position.
President Robinson, are you surprised that the US hasn't had a female president in the 30 years since you were president of Ireland?
Well, when I was based in New York, I kept getting asked that question, is the United States ready for a woman president? And I used to tell the story about the fact that because I had served as president and then I was followed by Mary McAleese, who did 2 terms, that was 21 years. And towards the end of that time, small boys would weep on their mother's knee and say, "Why can't I grow up to be president?" And the point is that, to change the how, we have to change the who. And it's the who is in the that will change the how leadership is done.
During your presidency, you championed inclusion and equality and peace building. You very famously put a symbolic light in the window of Áras an Uachtaráin to shine for Irish people all over the world. You invited LGBT groups to Áras an Uachtaráin at a time when gay sex was illegal in Ireland. You pushed for the legalization of birth control, and you played such a huge part in peace building, both in the island of Ireland, but also in the UK and across the world. What stands out for you during that time that you're most proud of your legacy in Áras an Uachtaráin?
Funnily enough, I don't think in those terms. If I could, I remember what an honor it was during those 7 years. I remember that as far as I was concerned, in my inauguration speech, I set out the promises to the Irish people that I was going to spend the next 7 years fulfilling. And that's how I see it, not as highlights or legacy so much as every single day was special, because every single day I had an opportunity either to go to a community in Ireland or to go abroad to, for example, Somalia in 1992 or Rwanda in 1994, or visit Queen Elizabeth as the first president to, I was the first president to do anything in the United Kingdom as president. And then when I went to Buckingham Palace and had tea with the Queen, that opened up a space. She was very gracious. We were photographed together. 2 years later, in 1996, I had a state visit 3 years later, to the UK. And now that was built on by President Mary McAleese inviting the Queen to come on her state visit, and President Michael D. Higgins having his own state visit to the UK. So all of this it's about a presidency that I kind of helped to open up. And I was very conscious that I was opening it up from a kind of tradition of it being a high office that did almost nothing and was served by elderly, distinguished, men who had served the country well, but were at the roughly end of their career, and they weren't expected to be and didn't really want to be very proactive. So that's what I was trying to change. And in many ways, that's why I didn't seek a second term, because having opened up the office, I wanted somebody to build on that. And both my successors, I think, have really fulfilled that by, continuing to build on the trust of the Irish people in a president they elect, to be different from politicians, to be a bit outside politics, above and below politics, and just to serve them in a different way.
As an aside, you talked about that visit to Buckingham Palace. Have you been watching The Crown? What's your take?
I actually have watched it, yes. It's certainly very well done in a very polished way. I don't think it helps the idea of royalty very much.
Back to more serious topics. 2020 has brought a global pandemic, an economic recession, a significant rise in natural disasters because of climate change. You have been at the forefront of human rights globally for a long time. What is the biggest human rights concern we have at the moment, and what should we be putting our focus and efforts into?
Well, I've thought a lot about the impact of COVID. It's like a mirror. It has exacerbated all of the inequalities in our world, from racial equality to gender equality to poverty inequality to the inequality of being an Indigenous person, the inequality of being a person with disabilities. And somehow that has made those inequalities less tolerable, if I could put it that way. And that's why I think we're seeing a lot of protest or a lot of marching. You know, it's a way of getting everybody out of their silos on their specific issues to understand that we cannot really go back to those inequalities. We have to, as the UN has said, build back better. And I'll come to that in a minute. But, you know, it does link those who march for Black Lives Matter with those who march for Me Too, or ending violence against women and girls, or Fridays for Future for the climate. You know, somehow we're all out of our comfort zone. And I actually think we can learn positive lessons from COVID. And if I can briefly talk about them, I mainly talk about them in the climate context, but I'll just briefly note them here. The first lesson is that collective human behavior actually matters. It's the only thing that's been protecting us from the virus in the absence of. And so collective human behavior will be needed in the future because we live more smartly and more in conformity and in in link with nature, and therefore we must reduce our consumer habits and still live well, but not get these constant plastic throwaway and too much waste. We waste a third of the food of the world. Can you imagine that? So that's the first lesson, that human behavior matters. The second lesson is that government matters. And I have watched in dismay a bad leadership in the United States add to the toll of lives and health and the economy of the United States. I have great affection for the United States. I studied there. I have so many friends there, and watching is painful. And it just shows you that you need good government, and that women-led governments have actually done quite well in taking the right decisions. The third thing is that science matters. We now see the health experts guiding governments. We need to listen to the climate scientists when we come out of this, and listen to them as we come out of this, because we don't have any time. We have a crisis of COVID, but there's the looming worst crisis of climate that hasn't gone away. So we have to come out of COVID in a way that aligns us with the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the fourth lesson is, there's more compassion now. And that's actually very important. We see it with food parcels and food queues in the United States, the richest country in the world, but people are suffering. And people care about that and have an empathy. And we need that empathy and solidarity for developing countries who are very affected by COVID. And the fifth and last lesson from COVID is, when money is needed by the rich world, money can be found. And that's you're about to have a huge, and I hope it will come about, a huge recognition of a stimulation fund now that is very, very badly needed by those who are suffering in the United States. We've had it in Europe. And what we have to do is also remember the developing countries in this context. So many, many lessons.
On that, because we were looking, I think everybody's thinking of 2020 as this kind of new era, this new world. As you said, which is very true, is, people already at a disadvantage for the brunt of COVID and will be bearing the brunt of it, as we try to get over the impact of that. When we look ahead to 2021 and the vaccination of the world, is there a worry on what countries and what segments of society will get it first over others for you?
There is a worry. I'm part of the elders, which I chair, and that's my most hard-working hat at the moment, is to be chair of the elders that Nelson Mandela brought together in 2007. And we're very supportive of an ACT accelerator and a movement for vaccines for developing countries, two linked international efforts. But we're seeing that the United States is over-ordering, the European Union is over-ordering the number of vaccines needed, and Canada similarly. So at least we're hoping that by over-ordering, those who are, will be available, but they mustn't be available after. They must be available at the time. So we're actually pressing at the moment to start now to have vaccinations for both low and middle income countries to show that the world has a solidarity. And I hope that will happen. We're trying very hard with the UN to make sure that that does happen.
I think that's great. President Robinson, you talked a little bit earlier about the collective power of people, and how there's governments and there's the collective and the impact that one person can make. And you touched on it a little bit in terms of food, or whether somebody has a meatless Monday, or what are the small steps? If somebody's watching this, right, we're in the new year, people are changing and making small personal steps. What would be the kind of tangible things that you think people can do to change the world around them, that anybody listening can do?
Well, actually, I love that question, Sam, because it is something I want to kind of message about, if I could put it that way, because I think there are 3 steps that every one of us can and actually should take. And the first step is to make the climate crisis, and I'm calling it a crisis because it is, the climate crisis personal in your own life, and do something that you weren't doing before to show that you've actually taken an ownership of it, if I could put it that way. And it could be that you're recycling more carefully, or you're changing your eating habits, or you're having less waste, whatever it is. And then it actually can help your climate anxiety if you're suffering from it, which many young people in particular are. And then the second step is to actually get angry about those who should have more responsibility. And that's governments right across the board, but it's also cities, it's also corporations, it's also, the need to change from fossil fuel to clean energy. And then the third step is the most important one. In getting angry, I don't mean, get angry and shouting about it. I mean, use your vote, use your voice, join organizations that are trying to, like the Fridays for Future and the Sunrise movement in the United States, and other, and conservation movements, and bringing clean energy to communities. All of the things that are happening, entrepreneurs, etc. Help them, join them, make it happen. And then the third thing is to imagine this world that we have to hurry towards. And that's the most important, because you see, we have to do it very quickly. By 2030, we have to have reduced by 45% the global carbon emissions of our world. And that's only now going to be 9 years away as we start, from January. So, we don't have any time except to understand this will be a much healthier world. It will be a world of green jobs. It will be a world of innovation. It will be a world of far more equality, because to get to that world, we'll have had to give access to the technology to developing countries. We'll have had to show the solidarity we promised, which we haven't yet fulfilled enough. And I'm very excited about that world, especially because, I have 7 grandchildren. They will be in their 40s, the eldest, and their 30s, and even maybe the 20s for the one that was born the other day. So come on, we've got to get excited.
I love that. Take action, get angry, and then have the vision of where the world could and should go. Finally, President Robinson, I've got one last question. I could talk to you all day, but you were honored as a Glamour Woman of the Year in 2005. And in the interview with Glamour...
I remember that.
You're in our coffee table book for next year as well, on the women that changed the world. the Glamour Women of the Year. In the interview with Glamour, you said, as the only girl wedged between four brothers, I had an early interest in human rights. You've had a phenomenal, impactful career in politics and policy, domestically and on a global stage. What's your message to the young women tuning in today who are considering roles in government or law or more, or in impacting change?
My message is your time has absolutely come. Take responsibility. Step up. Very often women say, I wonder if I'm really qualified for this. Young men don't tend to ask themselves that question. So young women, don't ask yourself that question. Just step up, because the world needs the diversity of leadership. And we see the benefit of it wherever it is. I've mentioned that women-led governments are doing better on COVID. And we see boards now where there's a balance. We see cabinets where there's a balance of men and women. We see parliaments where there's a balance doing better. And there's enough evidence of it at this stage. So this is the 21st century. Step up and follow those girls in particular in the climate space. Look at Greta Thunberg, who's almost changed the world on her own at the age of 15, 16, 17. You know, it's amazing how articulate. Shea Bastida is an 18-year-old Mexican climate activist whom I've learned a lot from. So come on, you know, and that's the lovely thing about our modern world, is that the intergenerational conversation has changed. It used to be that we, the elders, passed on our wisdom to passive youth who had to listen carefully. And now it's a real conversation, because the young are smart, they're digitally much more technically equipped than I am. I have to ask my children, or even now my grandchildren, how to get onto a particular platform or do whatever I want to do. And there's a much more equal relationship, and that is very good for the world, because young people are the majority of our world, and they really have to address the problems that we haven't solved very well, and be courageous and proactive and in solidarity throughout the world. And that's what I find with young people. They have that solidarity, and that's what I would love to encourage.
Well, you heard it right from President Robinson. Your time is now. For those people tuning into this very special conversation for the Irish-American Partnership, thank you so much, President Robinson. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Sam. I've also enjoyed it.
Incredible. Thank you to our 4 Nollaig na mBan honorees tonight. To Caitriona, Geraldine, Sam and Mary, you join an illustrious group of leaders who have inspired us over these many years.
We thank you for sharing your energy, your passion and your experience with us this evening, and commend you on your incredible accomplishments. In honour of these 4 inspirational women, the partnership is proud to present a grant to the Mary Robinson Centre, Ireland's first presidential library located in County Mayo, which will be a museum, archive and a research and educational facility. We are also delighted to award grants to the 3 schools attended by Sam, Caitriona and Geraldine: Scoilbarra in Cork, Scoil Pádraig in Ballyroan, Dublin, and Our Ladies College in Drogheda, County Louth. These women are tremendous advocates for and examples of the power and immense value of education. And it is our hope that with these grants, made possible by the generosity of you, our supporters, young people will be empowered to follow in the footsteps of these courageous women. And so we invite you to raise a glass or a cup of tea for a toast on this Nollaig na mBan. Good health to you all. Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Cogorticus.
Sláinte.
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 Cheers to everyone there tonight, to all your guests, to the honorees and to the Irish-American Partnership. I hope we all have a good 2021 and a healthy one. Cheers.
Gurv Mila Mahagurv Galer, Aflin Fi Vashayev, Tasulagam Gamemid Lakela Blian O'Hin Ag Nollaig na mBan. 1,000 thanks to you all for your support. On behalf of our board of directors and all at the partnership, I wish you a very happy and healthy new year. And I hope we will be together next year for Nollaig na mBan.
To signify brighter days ahead, we leave you with talented young singers hailing from President Robinson's hometown of Ballina. Here is the Centre Stage Vocal Academy led by choir director Maureen Lawler-Ginty to perform Here Comes the Sun.
Until we meet again, take care, slán go fóill.